Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Those who give up liberty in the pursuit of safety deserve neither. Now I've probably misquoted that, but that idea comes from Benjamin Franklin, and it's at the heart and soul of the book The Price of Safety by Michael C. Bland. It's a science fiction book set a couple of decades in the future where surveillance is everywhere and you're safe right up to the point where everything comes apart. And I'm really lucky enough, often I'm talking about the work and we're wondering, well, I wonder if the author meant this. I wonder if the author meant that. It's actually easier if we just talk to the author directly. And that's who my guest is today, Michael C. Bland. Michael, how are you doing today?
Matthew, thank you for having me on. I'm doing well.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Now, as always, I want to encourage people to engage with the material we've had. So if you want to pause this, go to your favorite bookstore, either online or others. I'm always going to recommend bookstop.org, but whatever it's, or bookstore.org, whatever it's going to be. But if you haven't, don't worry. We're going to fill you in. We're not going to spoil all of the plot, but we're going to give you the basic ideas because we want to talk about the main questions it raises. And so before that, Michael, just a little bit of introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got started as a science fiction writer.
Again, thank you for having me. I have been writing on and off for a number of years. Back when I was 10 years old, I wrote my own comic books. I created 3 comic books and drew them and everything, which they weren't very good, but showed my love for writing, telling stories. And I've always been a science fiction nut. My father had a whole bunch of science fiction novels throughout the house, so I grew up on those. And then more recently, I decided to actually get serious about it. I took classes at the University of Iowa Summer Writers Workshop. So any authors out there or want to be authors, I highly recommend going to the University of Iowa for their summer workshop.
Nice.
And then I started to develop the story that became the Price of Safety. And after working on it for a couple of years, I was able to get it traditionally published by a publishing company called Royal Castle. It ended up being a top 10 Amazon bestseller for dystopian. And it's won a number of awards. And actually then that led to the second book, The Price of Rebellion. And then the third, The Price of Freedom, which just came out last year. And between the 3, they've won a total of 15 awards, including Best Science Fiction Novel. Thank you. Best Science Fiction Novel of the Year by Indies Today for The Price of Rebellion, the second book.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, and I've read the first one. I've skimmed parts of the second and third. I'm looking forward to those. We'll mostly just talk about the first, though. And like I said, there's going to be some spoilers here, but we want to mostly talk about the questions. But so that people can be filled in a bit, let me try and give the author himself a brief summary of his own work, and you can tell me where I'm wrong. Our protagonist is a guy named Dre Quintero. He's a scientist, an inventor. He's done a lot with, as the book opens, he's helping to promote a new power source that's hopefully going to revolutionize the world. And we come to learn that he also has been a key player in helping to design the security systems of the United States of, I think it was 2057. Is that correct? I'm terrible with numbers.
2047.
47. Thank you. And in this world, security is, surveillance is very, very high because, of course, that's what keeps people safe, right? Is if you can watch everything. And it's interesting. I don't know. Did you watch the Copenhagen test?
Not yet. I plan to. Yeah.
So I hope there's no lawsuits that come out of it because it has a very similar idea in some ways. But understandably, there's all sorts of surveillance in this world, including even that your own brain or your own sight can be hacked into or observed through all sorts of technological means. And Dre is perfectly happy in this world. He helped design it. He's convinced it helps keep him safe, right up until the point where he gets a frantic call from his daughter that her boyfriend is dead and she's in trouble. And first the story is that he attacked her. As it comes out, it looks like at first he's concerned that even though he's convinced she's innocent, that she might not look that way to the surveillance state. And so he has to help cover up her crimes. And then as the story goes on, we learn more and more about that she's kind of in this web of rebellion against the surveillance state. And he gets kind of sucked along on this great series of adventures that include his whole family. And wind up through the course of it really forcing him and forcing us, the author, to ask, what is the price of safety? How much is it okay to give up? And how much can these kind of powers be abused? As well as some great questions about family loyalty and where does loyalty to your family allow you to break the law, even when you do think it's just, or put yourself in danger and all kind of things like that. Did I kind of cover the main points there?
Yes, you did. Good job.
So what was the inspiration for this particular story?
I was inspired actually when I was living in Chicago and I was on the L one day on the subway,
Hmm.
and I realized every other person in the car just were staring. They were staring at their phone,
Right.
and I could have just started taking my clothes off if I wanted to. No one would have had any idea. Yet at the same time, there are cameras in the ceiling of the car. So while no one is watching, someone is always potentially watching.
Right.
And so, in that vein, that started me thinking and one realizing how we've all just gotten really comfortable, or at least accepted, security cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
Walk down almost any street. I read a statistic that in London, the average person is caught on video 338 times in the
Mm.
course of a day, and that's in a way, as you're saying, there's that security safety factor, but then at the same time, if there's someone that you care about that is in trouble, how do you protect that person in this world that is becoming even more monitored, more watched? How do you avoid that? And then with this kind of level of power and ability to watch everybody and track everybody, it, who are the people behind that power, and what is their end game there?
Right. Right. And how much does that then become a just to keep themselves in power becomes the goal.
Well, that's the risk. Absolutely. Yes.
One thing I was struck by as the story was going on was the sense of paranoia that you develop in the protagonist and in all of the characters who are on the run. And I was struck a lot by, it's been years since I read 1984, but one thing I remember from that book was the idea that it's not that you think that someone is watching all the time, it's that you never know who's watching when. So you kind of
Yeah.
have to act like someone is watching all the time. And that because in the world you create, some people have their optics, monitored and some don't, but you have to just assume everyone does. And you can never trust, like, can your own family look at you? They have to look away who is going to betray you and who's not.
Exactly, and especially the more and more that surveillance systems are hooked up to AI, and where it's able to notice things that are out of the ordinary and things that might trigger a concern to show it to the higher ups, who's actually now going to look and see what this issue is. It's becoming more and more where you have to, as you're saying, you have to act and be expect that you're being watched. And
Yeah.
there's also, they can always then go back on the data and check back then, oh, well, this person's being suspicious here. What have they been doing the last few days? So even if you have been under someone's radar for quite some time, you could trigger something that then will follow back to what you've been doing and then build that case against you and really make you a mark.
Right. Yeah, one thing I was really struck by in that is also that because of the way the surveillance is set up, particularly when you get to that scene where he finds Raven with the boy who's dead, he's not focused as much on what actually happened. He's focused on what it looks like. And a lot of the time the question is with the surveillance, not what's the actual thing, but how will it look? Talk more about that and this kind of idea, because surveillance is tells you a lot, but obviously also there's a lot you're not seeing. Talk about how that came in.
Well, in fact, there's a little bit with the story itself, because I told it in the first person point of view. It's all through Dre's eyes. So if he doesn't see it, you as the reader don't see it. Right. So I play with that a little bit throughout the story as well, and have that as part of it. But it is very visual in terms of what we see, because that's going to really trigger the authorities, those who you frankly don't want them to watch you and you to come on their radar. Because once you fall under that, once you become part of the, those with a star by your name, or however you want to put it, then life's much more difficult for you. And everything that you do will then start to be watched. And then that's also what triggers them digging in to your finances, to your beliefs, to what is it that you are doing and how big of a threat are you? And is it going to get to a point where they're going to make you disappear?
Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting and such a great parallel, because, in our own world, we know that people monitor what search terms we put in and stuff like that. All of that internet record is kept. And I have friends who are authors. One friend of mine loves writing murders. And, every now and then she'll sort of think, oh, wait, if I Google how long does it take for a body to dissolve in acid, what is that gonna look like? And at one point she was telling me about how she wanted to write a book about like the world of child trafficking and stuff like that. And she had to be incredibly careful because she wanted to learn about this world. But you Google those things, you're going to get put on a watch list real fast, no matter how much you try to say, like, I am doing this for this research purpose.
Right. Yeah. No matter how innocent your, what your reason is, I'm sure almost every author, their search history, they're on some sort of list because the strange things that we all have to Google, whether we end up using it or not in our story, but you need to have an understanding. A lot of really strange things.
Yeah, no, for sure. Sure. It's funny too, because I love how you talk about how much the surveillance state is just a part of a world right now, because I mean, I live in Minneapolis. I'm living this every day right now, but also, as I mentioned to you before we got started, I just had a kid, and it's a wonderful thing. It's a great thing. And when it was time for him to no longer sleep in our room, mom and dad wanted some more sleep. We got him a great crib. We got in his own room. And what did we set up? A monitor.
Yes.
A nice little camera that just points right at him and has some smart features, and will make sure to dial the volume up so that we hear it if he makes any kind of noise. And this feels to me like the most innocuous thing you could possibly do. Like, of course, you want to know if your child's in any danger whatsoever. And yet that first time that me and my wife sat down, he's in a darkened room, but it's a low light camera, to realize we're watching him on a surveillance system. It was such a moment of like, oh my God, this is how it works.
Such a slippery slope, isn't it?
Yeah.
However, but your intentions were, of course, completely, honorable, and you were there you want to protect your child, yet also be able to get a little sleep, have him learn to, be by himself and be comfortable and all that. So all really good reasons for doing that. And, it comes down to the intent. It comes down to what people are going to use the surveillance for.
Right. And I think that's kind of part of the point of your book, right? Is that Dre helps. There are people at the top they've got very nefarious reasons, but Dre is designing this because he thinks it helps keep people safe. And on one level, maybe that's true, but also, I guess that's the idea. That's what you mean by the price of safety, right? It's like, what are you paying for this?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And two things with it is, one, because he has two children. He had a third who he lost. And so a big reason behind the security is he's wanting to help protect his kids and other people's kids.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect of it, talking about the price of things, and I'm guilty of this as well. So I'm not saying I'm any better than anybody else. I have a free Gmail account. Google can very easily use all the data, use all the information that stems from that free account, because is it really free? No, of course not. And that's one thing that you're paying a price of some degree. And what is that price? And do you even really know? You really stop to think about what the price is of using the free. And the internet is great, and there's so many things you can use it for and improve your own life and those of the people you care about. But there is a potential price of it.
Right. And I mean, I know obviously when you're sitting down to write, what you want to do more than anything is tell a good story, but obviously you're hoping to get your audience thinking in certain ways and stuff like that. And certainly the impression I got is that you're not a Luddite. You're not saying, therefore, let's turn everything off. Is it that you're trying to say is that we should be thinking about it more and not just taking it for granted?
Correct. Absolutely. Yes. Technology is great. I love it as much as anybody else. And some of the things I created in my books, I really want to come true. I think they'll be really cool to have and to be able to do certain things. But it is exactly to your point, is want to make sure that we're going into this with our eyes open and you realize the risks. And I think we're way past the point of being able to opt out, especially with security, not unless you want to put yourself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, which that's not much fun, but some people enjoy. But it's to be aware of what those risks are in the world that we live in today, and to be aware of it and just make sure we're comfortable with it. If not, how do you respond?
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I are kind of a similar age. I'm born in the 70s, and one of the things that I feel like I've experienced is, we grew up where we didn't have the internet wasn't a thing. We've slowly gotten to use it. And in a way, I think it's hard for a lot of people today to understand. There was really a feeling of anonymity when it got started, that you didn't put Matthew at proton.net. You put, Rebel 612, whatever the heck it was. And there was this sense of anonymity. And I feel like people today should know that, But every now and then I'll see people like, as we're posting about what we're doing here in Minneapolis and stuff like that. And someone will post, hey, remember, we can't guarantee this group isn't monitored. We can't guarantee this Signal chat or this Facebook post. And people freak out about that. Where do you think this is, that there still is this assumption of security and that, like, if you're saying it in a private chat with 5 of your friends or something, then therefore it's totally safe?
I don't know. It almost seems like a little bit of just human nature that, well, unless I can actually see the potential threat, that, oh, this should be okay. As well as maybe a little bit of, well, there are millions of users. What do they care about me? Well, but you become a statistic. You become especially if it's a chat that is discussing some of the things that are unfortunate things that are going on in your area, they start going down a political route, then that starts triggering certain flags.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right. It used to be very anonymous. And I've even noticed more recently that almost anytime I just want to check out this website, they say, oh, give me your email address, give me your cell phone, give me your phone number. And you really lose that, that ability to be anonymous, because that all can be tracked and all can be followed. And then, almost every website now you go to the first time, and the cookies and even if it's just, the just bare minimum ones, well, still there's a level of tracking. Right. And, the software that you get with the AVG or McAfee or whatever, where they now have hey, we can clean up those cookies to stop the tracking on your computer. But then next time you go out on the internet, there's more tracking, and all of those things whittle away at that ability to be anonymous and to be able to just search for things without it potentially you showing up on a list or tracking or anything else. And then, not to get political or anything, but the most recent administration where Doge came in and getting everyone's data, trying to have it all in one center. Why? What was the reason?
Yeah.
And what's going to be the impact, the ramifications down the road of that? And I don't have that answer, but it should be a big cause for concern.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm glad you reached the politics conversation, because one we definitely talk about here, and I want to keep the focus on your book, but I think it's an interesting question of this first book was written, what, 5 or 6 years ago?
First one was actually written in 2018, 2019, and then it came out early 2020.
I mean, I have to wonder, kind of, you were ringing a bell about this 6 years ago. What's it been like over the last 6 years, kind of watching as like the future you're predicting is, obviously we're not anywhere near that point. I don't want to be alarmist, but clearly the surveillance state, as you just said, has continued quite, and increased, not just under this most recent administration, but certainly under this most recent administration, and certainly in other parts of the world as well. What's that been like, kind of like seeing the dystopia you create in your mind kind of coming true a little bit?
It's I have to admit, it's a little bit of a weird feeling, because a part of me is really concerned, because I certainly don't want to create us to reach the world that I created, but a little bit of maybe I kind of was right. I kind of started to see, and I try to make the stories as realistic as possible. And I've had family members, I've had my wife look at me and go, okay, this is getting scary, because we continue to see things that were in my books. In fact, okay, here's a really quick aside. So one of the pieces of technology that I envisioned for the books is called a DNA scanner. Right. Because we all shed dead skin cells and dead hair follicles. Well, in my book, that machine sucks those out of the air, run the DNA, and identify you. A month after my second book, The Price of Rebellion, came out, a company in California announced they created that exact technology.
Yeah.
So very freaky moment when I read that.
And I'm guessing you didn't get any copyright payment, did you?
Of course not. No, I'm still waiting for a check from them. And of course that company was, well, we'll put those machines on hiking trails, so if someone gets lost, we can identify where they were. Yeah, sure you are, but other people may use that same technology in other ways.
Well, especially because I think right now, if you think we need to get away from cameras, we need to get away from, listening devices, where should we go to maybe talk about how we feel about what's happening? Let's go on a hike. Let's get,
Right.
that's one of the first places I would think of, to not right now in Minnesota where it's, colder than Hoth, but
Yeah.
at any other time of the year.
Right. But then they can track you, and then that starts where you're now on another list, and what's going on, and who you meet, and
Yeah.
all of those things. Yeah.
It's funny, another podcast I'm doing is called the Marvel Movie Minute, where we watch Marvel movies minute by minute. And we just started doing Captain America Winter Soldier. And I remember the first time I watched that movie, I really enjoyed it. But I thought, oh, come on, a government that was putting people on watch lists and saying these people are un-American or are not worthy of being American or not worthy of being here because they have the wrong idea. Come on, that's never good. And I watch it today and I'm like, oh, okay, well, you were right. I was wrong. I guess you're kind of in the same boat.
Yes, exactly. And it's concerning. I don't have any answers, but it is definitely concerning.
Well, and one of the things that I think I like most, because again, it really hits home, is, I'm, as an, I'm using this as an example to get to your book, but like, I'm part of groups where a lot of people are saying, we hate what's happening. So what do we do? And in part because they don't know what they can do, but also because they're not sure what is actually physically safe for them to do, and what are the risks they're willing to take. And I want to get to the family part more specifically, but one of the, I think the most interesting parts of Dre's journey is, he first finds out that Raven is part of this rebel group, and his answer is no, you can't. Even as he starts to think maybe she has a point that what they're fighting against is bad, it's his daughter. He doesn't want her fighting. And by the end of the book, spoilers, but if you've read science fiction, you probably know where this is going. He and his daughter are a lot more connected with the rebellion than he would have wanted.
Right.
Talk about that journey, because I think that is one of figuring out what are the risks we're willing to take for not just in politics, but in anything of, for, because I think to me, I look at it as a politics, but I also think like a teenager could read this and think, you know what, I haven't stood up to the school bully who keeps picking on that other kid in my class, and maybe I should put myself at risk a little more in order to stand up for what's right. Talk about Dre's journey in terms of coming to be more willing to take risks both for himself and for his daughter.
That was one of the big themes of the book, and one of the big reasons why I wanted to write it is, how do you not only protect people that you care about in this world where they can track you and monitor you in ways you can't avoid, but then what do you do about it?
Right.
Because it's easy to just accept and just, oh, it's fine. And I think in some aspects, and not to get political, but some of the things going on nowadays, I think some people are just going, you know what, it's fine. I'm not going to, I'm just going to go about my life.
Yeah.
Well, if you find yourself in a world where accepting that means you are giving up virtually all of your freedoms, there has to be a point where you go, it's enough. I have to stand up. And in particular for Dre, he has that additional challenge of, if he does do that, if he stands up not only for himself, but to help try to give his daughters a future, he's also risking their present, because he's putting them in danger, no matter how much he tries to shield them. So that was a big struggle for him. But then the more that throughout the story, the way that I had it is where he gets being pulled more towards having to take that leap, to stand up. And that's a horribly difficult thing to do. The people that are standing up in various ways today, it's a huge amount of bravery. It's not something easy to do. Those who march, who stand up for either side of the political issue or other issues, I applaud their commitment to it. And I'm not saying one way right, one way is wrong, but in the world that I created, there is a cleaner line in terms of right and wrong, and the risks that once Dre really realizes what has been going on, it's clear in terms of what he should do to help his children. But then, like I said, that's also then putting them in terrible danger.
Right. And I realize maybe even jumping ahead a bit, let's kind of back up to how he first gets, because I think his feelings towards Raven and towards his other daughter and his wife and all that change a lot through the course of the book. Let's start with where he first gets pulled into this, where he gets, he comes upon a scene of, his daughter is covered in blood and there's a dead boy on the ground. And as I was reading this, and I'd heard an interview with you before, before I read it, so I knew that kind of part of the point was that he's going to realize that she's not as innocent as it might look at first.
Right.
And I was thinking about these studies that have been done. I think it was like 6 or 7 years ago when school bullying became like a big deal and people were really talking about it. And there was some survey where they surveyed parents at a bunch of schools, and like 80% of the parents said that their kids were bullied. And while on the one hand, like I think that probably like an awful lot more kids than we think are bullied are, I also was sort of thinking a lot of these parents, their kids are probably doing some of the bullying as well, and yes, people can be both bullied and be bullies, but it got me thinking about this idea of like, as parents, we never want to accept that our kid might be the one who's doing something wrong. We're going to look at something, we're going to assume our kid's the innocent one.
Of course. You love your kids.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Of course. It can't be my kid's fault. Someone else must have done something.
No.
That's quite a story. That's another really deep ethical question. Tell me more about how that story came about for you.
Well, I wanted to put them in a position where he had no choice but to do what he thought was right in order to help get her out of the situation, and especially because he helped create this surveillance state, and with the best of intention. And that's one thing I really like with the characters, and what I tried to do is no one's black and white. No one is perfectly good, perfectly evil. The bad guy has layers, the main one, and he has his own struggle that he's trying to do. And with that is everyone thinks they're the hero of their own story.
Yeah.
Right. Just like you think your kids are going to be angels, or at least they're good kids overall, maybe not perfect, but they're good kids. Every bad guy, they think they're doing the right thing for the right reason. So in that vein, that's how I was approaching this story. And I thought it was very interesting. I thought it would be more interesting as a writer as well as a reader, to have someone who is not as black and white, and especially someone that his daughter, that she's old enough. She's 19. She's an adult technically. And, so she has a level of maturity that she knows what she's doing is not on the up and up for her own reasons, though. Now she thinks, again, she's a hero for her own story. She thinks that she's doing things for the right reasons. And it's absolutely unfortunate what happened with Trevor, with the boyfriend at the beginning of the story. But it was an accident, but her underlying reason why she's even there is not so innocent.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's watching his journey, because I think it would have been easy to just have like one single moment where he figures that out, but instead you see it's this process, and it's interesting because it kind of goes up and down, because at first it's like, oh, she's innocent, and then he's like, is she just a flat out murderer? And there's this other guy involved, and she just killed one guy to be with another, and then it becomes actually this other guy is recruiting her to be part of this rebel group, the Founding Fathers, and so and I got the sense these sort of like, is it better if my daughter is an idealistic terrorist or a murderer? Like, I think, and he comes to sort of see maybe the idealistic terrorist is maybe better because one terrorist is someone else's freedom fighter and stuff like that. But it's still, it's fascinating to see him go through that journey.
Thank you. I definitely wanted to have this struggle and this journey, because also it's a big leap where I have him from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. If I tried to, in my mind, speed that up, I didn't know if it would be as believable. Right. So I really wanted to make all of it believable. I've read a number of books, and I'm sure you and your listeners have as well, where you're reading a book, you're like, okay, I'm liking it. And then there's some leap that the author does that suddenly go, yeah, no, the author went, I don't buy that. Yeah. I really try to avoid that in all three of the books, because otherwise, to me, it takes you out of the story and you lose something. So I really try to make it as believable. So his struggle and his journey, I try to make it as realistic as possible in this world that is, while as realistic as possible, it's also not the world that we live in. So it was that balance throughout it.
Well, and my sense was that you're kind of creating her, and Jax is the guy she's I guess is her actual boyfriend, despite what Trevor thinks. Yes. That it's also her entree into the freedom fighters. And we do learn that, like, while Jax has genuinely fallen for her, he's kind of like, she thinks that she's this big important rebel. Really, they're just kind of using her to get to her father, and kind of using Jax as well. So you've got this like fun little Romeo Juliet thing there going.
Yeah.
But my sense was that it kind of like what winds up happening is that she gets established as like the other moral pole. That if there's I'm willing to sacrifice safety. I'm willing to sacrifice safety I'm willing to sacrifice all of my freedom for safety. She's I'm willing to completely put everything on the line in order for freedom. And that's kind of what I liked how it started to wrestle with the question of, is she right? Are this rebellion group right? The next book is called The Price of Rebellion. So I'm guessing it's a question you've given a little bit of thought to as well, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And she was more of she's the idealistic one.
Yeah.
She is the one that it's all about idealism. Of course, she's a younger individual. So, when you're younger, you're more idealistic, right? But she also really wants to make a difference and help those who she feels that can't help themselves. And so they each come at it from a different angle or different position, and where they both end up during the journey they both take. Coming to kind of the same end spot from a different point of view and different reasons.
And as you mentioned before, there was a third child. My memory of names is awful. I apologize, but I think Adam was
Adam. Correct. Adam.
And he died fairly young. And we're not going into too much of the details later in the book, but obviously something terrible happened. Mm-hmm. And that, as you said, that is a part of what motivates Dre towards, I need to do more for safety. I need to make the world safer for kids like Adam and for my kids who I have now. Mm-hmm. That also really struck me because, I think that a lot of times we start making these sacrifices when we've suffered a great loss, and this is everything again from America after 9/11 to, if one partner cheats on you, guess what? You're a lot more likely to wonder, what are they doing when they stay out an extra hour at night, and that,
of course,
that sense of loss being a part of what, and of trauma being a part of what motivates you to want more safety. Talk more about that, kind of how that, what was your thinking on that question?
Well, it was definitely a very important part of both Dre as well as his marriage.
Right.
Losing a child, and unfortunately, luckily it never happened to me, but some of the things in my own past, I could relate to it. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that you never completely get over. You never completely, it changes you. It forever will change you as a person, and how you, just as you had said with, if you get cheated on, you always will wonder with your spouse. Yeah. So that was definitely part of what I wanted to explore a little bit and have it as part of the driving force and the motivation. He has 2 daughters who he loves tremendously. But then there's also been friction as a result between him and his wife, mm-hmm. and the struggle, how they also handled that loss and reacted differently, and their own past. Because
right.
You could have the closest marriage, but a trauma like that, each person is going to react potentially in a different way. And do they get back to each other? Is the marriage done completely? What happens? And so that was one of a subplot that I had with it that does have ramifications, as in the story. But that was something that I thought was really interesting to not only help give the motivation and the reason why Dre does what he does in terms of creating this surveillance network, but then what are the ramifications, and still echoes even years after they lost their son, and what the echoes right. are still later on.
For sure. Yeah. And it's, first of all, just to know what you're talking about, I completely agree. I used to do a lot of counseling for couples who are going through some kind of reproductive loss. And one of the things that they found is that the divorce rates of couples that have had infant loss or young child loss just absolutely skyrocket. And a lot of the times it's because there's a feeling that together you've experienced this terrible trauma. But in reality, it's 2 people who've experienced the same trauma individually, and they're often going to try to do it together, but they're not going to have that same trauma experience, and especially if they heal in different ways, heal at different paths. And I think you tell that story really brilliantly, and I definitely want to get to the character of his wife Mina in a second, but I just want to push a little more on this idea of fear and trauma, and what's kind of your thinking there in terms of the that how that can motivate us to be willing to give up more in terms of safety and to more of these moral compromises out of that sense of fear.
Absolutely, and that is a lot of it is fear, and a lot of it is because a level of helplessness, because you
Yeah.
lost that child and you weren't able to save them, and so how do you make sure that never happens again, and to try to help reduce that feeling of helplessness.
Yeah.
And so that's a big driver behind it. And so that was, I thought, very interesting, because especially this is a sci-fi-ish story. It's not, there are no aliens, there are no spaceships, but it is in a science fiction,
Right.
it's in a futuristic, near future world. And one of the things I really wanted to explore with that is, and just because we're 20 years in the future, or however many years, whatever the science fiction story is, there's still family, there's still loss, there's still emotions, there's still
Right.
those interactions and those ramifications. And so I thought it would be really interesting to have that story within the science fiction genre.
And I think that's so essential. I've said beforehand here that what I love most about science fiction is when it says we're going to take a problem that people today deal with, put it in a totally different new situation, but still ask about the same problem in a way that people today can relate to. My mother used to watch original episodes of Star Trek with me, and that's exactly what we do. And I think, I love stories that do that. And it's funny to me because this is not true science fiction by any means, but my first real kind of entree into this world was Star Wars. From a very young age, I was watching. My mother would say that A New Hope was my babysitter. She could put it in the Betamax. That's how old I am, Betamax. And walk away to the other room or whatever, and know that I was going to be glued to that TV. And one of the things that's always struck with me is that idea that like fear leads to anger leads to hate, etc. And yeah. I look at that today, and it's everything from the friend of mine who's gotten badly hurt by one relationship and is now having such trouble, wanting to like know what their partner's doing at every time, all the way up to, well, now we need to know every single thing about people who go on airplanes or, whatever it is, or why can't we just identify this one group and say, if all Muslims or all people in this country or whatever stay out, it's like you said, it's the reaction to helplessness is now a desire to have more control. And that leads to that desire for control is where so much of these problems happen from.
Not to mention that then that desire to learn more and to watch more and all that, then that starts taking over your, a large part of your focus and your activities. And so then are you really healing and getting better from it? Or are you letting your fear and your trauma and what you struggled with to consume you to a degree?
Right. And I think you give a good example of that. Big spoilers for a major major plot thing that happens about halfway through the book. If you want to pause again, go read the book. Because as you said, him and his wife Mina are having these very different experiences of their son's loss. Mm-hmm. And the villain you introduce is this guy named Kiernan, a secret agent, and the best traditions of all the things that can mean. And he's offered a deal. Come and help us take down these rebels, and you and your family will be totally safe. And Drake can't do that. He can't bring himself to do that. In part because he doesn't trust them, but also because he seems to think it's wrong. Mm-hmm. But Mina does. And Mina betrays them or at least in Mina's mind, she keeps the family safe because that's what matters most. And of course, he's against that, and it winds up getting their other daughter killed, Talia.
Yeah.
Talk about that. Talk about sort of because that desire to keep your family safe at all costs is one that makes so much sense to us, and you kind of make that desire a villain in an interesting way, or at least not a villain, but an antagonist, to be sure, that makes things harder and leads to the exact opposite of what she wants. Talk about that and what's the decision there?
Well, because I wanted to show that just because we do things that we think that will make things better, the quote unquote make things better, doesn't always, and sometimes can make it horribly wrong. And while everyone might have the best intentions, and Mina had her reasons for doing it, which I go into in the book, it's be careful of what you think you want.
Right.
You think that you're going to, she's allowing herself to believe that this bad guy, this guy who clearly has other intentions and other reasons for making this offer, to when you are going to delude yourself into just turning a blind eye to the risks, and which is also a reflection of the bigger story of allowing the security and the surveillance state and turning a blind eye to the risks with it. And so Her was a little bit of a reflection of it, or a microcosm of the same risk, which is again a risk kind of throughout the entire story that I wanted to just have people kind of really stop and think about. Do they want to accept this state of where anyone can watch you, anyone in power can track you, trigger you, or identify you as someone that might be a risk, or someone that is different, or whatever that issue might be, and then what's going to be the consequence.
Right. No, and it's really well, and I really appreciate that, because I think, do you know the phrase "leopards won't eat my face"?
No.
So it's a phrase that gets tossed around a lot in liberal lefty circles, but it's talking about the idea of those folks will say, well, yes, I know that like this group, that they target all those other people, but they won't hurt me. I will be safe. And as we've seen, a lot of people who voted for this administration and now are being hurt by the tariffs or hurt by things like that. And there's some cruelty in it, I'll admit, but there's sort of a sense of the mocking of it is you were convinced the leopards wouldn't eat your face. You were convinced that you would be safe if you collaborated, if you helped out, and that's not just limited to this administration by any means. That happens in all administrations.
Of
people
course,
will often convince themselves that even though this group is fundamentally untrustworthy, I can trust them. They will be good to me, and it never works out. And that's very much what I see there in the Mina story, is how that danger of convincing yourself, despite all evidence of, because again, I think it's a kind of control. It's a no. If I trust this person, then everything will be okay.
Yes, and there's also that element, also manipulation from the point of the bad guy. He knows what buttons to push with her to get what he wants, and she lets him. She lets herself believe the spin that he gives, and with horrible consequences. Right.
And I don't want to spoil anything, but I will ask: does she appear again in later books, or is she kind of written off, or should I just leave that for when I start reading more?
She comes back.
Okay,
I'll leave it at that.
Nice. I was a little surprised we didn't hear more from her, so I'm looking forward to that. I've had you almost now, and I don't want to go too much longer, but the one last thing I want to ask about, because I think it's kind of germane to all of this, and again, now I'm going to spoil things from the very end of the book, is for our main characters. Towards the end, I feel like in that there's that sense that they are peeling back layer after layer of the onion, but they still want to fundamentally believe that the system itself is okay. And they come up with this idea that it's the agency that's bad. It's the agency that's corrupt. And if the government only knew about the problems with the agency, then everything would be okay.
Correct.
And of course, through some great technological kind of shenanigans they love how you came up with, they figured out that that's not the case.
Right.
What's going on there? Because to me, that felt like such a powerful statement of like, you have to stop trusting in any of it almost.
Because one of the things in the story, the technology, which again, I actually would love to be able to have, but everyone has a small implant in their head, which is basically like a miniature computer, and they have lenses. Their lenses have clear computer screens on them. So imagine like Google Glass or the Apple Plus's VR, where you can interact with the real world while being digitally connected. This is to the nth degree, and where while that's a great potential technology, the risk is that someone can manipulate then what you see, and if I can manipulate what you see, I can manipulate what you think, and that. Again, goes to, are you allowing yourself to be manipulated in ways that if you really stopped and paid attention to what was really going on, you might not be? And unfortunately, and I'm as guilty as this as anybody else, being busy, being distracted, having your own concerns, your own issues that you're working on. But if you don't keep your eyes open, wide open, then there's a risk. And I wanted to reinforce that, and to then take this technology to what I thought was kind of a logical conclusion in terms of now you're letting everyone letting others have access to everyone and to that technology and to be able to link into it. And what would you then do with it?
Right. And that's such a powerful idea. This idea of if you can control what people see, you control what they think. We don't have it directly into our brain, but between social media and regular media, we certainly have something close to it.
Right.
And even just like, you're talking to a friend, they're telling you about the problem they had with their boss. You're hearing that friend's version of it. You're not seeing the other sides of it. And yeah, support your principal and screw the bosses, but you know what I mean? Like, and one thing I was struck by with this is I was thinking about how a habit I've gotten into, and I'm very neurodiverse, and so I find this really helpful, is I have found that sometimes I even don't trust my own memory because, like, if I have a fight with my father or with my partner or something, there'll be an emotional attachment I have to that memory. And there's neuroscience that's backed this up. And then so I remember it in those terms, and often I'll remember like what they actually said was worse. And so happily I don't fight that often with my partner, but we've agreed that we have to have kind of a hard, stressful conversation. Sometimes we'll have it through instant messenger, like back and forth, and part of the idea is that we have this written record, and I can say, she says something that I find hurtful. My brain is going to remember it 2 weeks later as much worse than it was. So let me go back and see, no, actually what she said was not that bad. And really she was kind of right. And maybe, and
Right.
So when I first read this technology of you can literally download your memories and go, I was like, this is amazing. But of course it's so terrifying because you're right. It's that once that's created, you can do anything with it,
Right. Absolutely. And you're correct. Memory is very flawed. And I don't have an easy fix other than, downloading those memories. But then exactly, memory's flawed. We're not perfect. And, and everyone I think is trying to do their best. But man, especially the more advanced we become, the better the technology. And we haven't even touched on AI, the ability to change, manipulate images, create fake videos, all of those things. And that's just going to make it even more tougher, not only for our generation, but then future generations, to the point, what are you going to be able to believe?
Yeah. No, it's very true. And it's something really scary as I look at, what my child and their peers are going to grow up in. Well, and let me just wrap up then by kind of pulling back the camera a bit, because kind of one of the whole ideas of this show is that we look at like, how is this media, how the media that we love, getting us to think about things in different ways, because I'm a big believer, like, yeah, I could write an essay about the surveillance state and why it's problematic, but someone making a movie or writing a book is often going to be a more, productive way of getting this conversation started. Talk a bit about kind of, it seems like you were someone who looked at the world, was frustrated and a little scared about what you saw, and writing was kind of how you responded to that. And I think that's something a lot of people are wrestling with in terms of how they can respond. I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how that has worked for you, and more than anything, if you find that it's helpful in terms of looking at the world and the problems you see, and to know, here's what I did, here's how I played my part.
Absolutely. I definitely wanted to bring this to people's attention. Keep in mind, though, it's what I try to also, first of all, on a surface level, I try to make it a fun, fast-paced book, fun characters, twists, all those things. So my original purpose was entertainment. So please, anybody who's considering it, don't think that this is going to be a dry.
I just care about the screen part. No, it's a really fun book too.
Thank you. But having said that, yes, this is definitely something that was clearly very important to me and very concerning to me, because myself, I started out realizing I was not having a hang up over all of these cameras and surveillance and everything that's around, and using the free everything on the website, on the internet and Gmail and everything else. I was as neck deep as anybody else. And so it was partly for myself a little bit of a wake-up call of, hey, I need to be aware of myself as well as for others. Is this the kind of world that we want to live in? And to really try to be very aware of it. And I know there are ways to potentially avoid it in the future as technology gets worse and worse, or more and more sophisticated, let's say that, more prevalent. But that's definitely going to be something that I think that needs to be continually addressed. And with my story, as well as others, I write about this type of topic and this kind of issue, so that more and more people are aware of it and can start to push back if they don't like where this is going.
Well, and that's what I really wanted to that's really why I want to ask that question, because I think kind of what we talked about in the book, in your own book, but today a lot of people feel very powerless, and that's, I think, on all sides of these political and spectrums, and all of it is not even political. It's just about what's happening at their workplace, what's happening in their family or whatever. And I think there's lots of things people can do, and there's people out in the streets, and there's people working in politics, there's people working in advocacy. But also, and I'm not an artistic person, so it's not me, but every time someone says, I see this and I want to write a book about it, I want to write a poem about it, I want to do a painting about it, or create art, or, a song about it, to me, it is just one more great way of bringing attention to this. And so I want to thank you for that, and kind of use that to, talk to our listeners and say, hey, it's you don't have to be out the street. There's so many things you can be doing. And if you're creative and this is the kind of thing you can do, please do, because we need more works like this. But also, yeah, put a good story in. Put the personal in. Put some great chase scenes in, because there's a lot of chase scenes, and there's a lot of stuff about dark matter, which I don't know anything about astrophysics, but it was still kind of, it was a fun little science fiction thing. So
fantastic.
Yeah, so
thank you.
Thank
Glad
you.
you enjoyed it.
So for people who are like, well, I want to pick up this book, they're going to read the book. They're going to read the Price of Trilogy, which is all three books. It's Price of Safety, Price of Rebellion, Price of Freedom. Correct. I believe, right?
Yeah.
So where else though? Do you have like a blog, a podcast? Reveal yourself in terms of where can we have surveillance on you to follow what you're up to?
The best is through my website, which is mcbland.com. So very easy. Also available on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. You should be able to link to me from my website. Also, the books are available in Audible as well as print and ebook.
Oh, awesome.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookstore.org, all kinds of places. So it's out there in every format that your listeners will like.
I right now I'm spending a lot of time with a baby in my arms, so I can hold a Kindle and read pretty easily. But
Good.
There's a lot of times where I'm mostly consuming books on long drives, or when I'm washing dishes, or sometimes when I'm folding a lot of baby clothes, so or changing diapers. So knowing that's on Audible as well is just so great, because I think it is such a great way to consume these books.
The guy who did it, Andrew, he did a fantastic job. My publisher found him. He did all three books. Did an incredible job. So highly recommend the Audible version.
That's great. All right. Well, Michael, thank you so much. To all of our listeners, thank you all so much for tuning in. Please let us know what you think. If you read the book especially, send us your thoughts. What are your thoughts on the surveillance state? I hope you don't have Elf on the Shelf, but what do you think about that? That's another part of the surveillance state. And most importantly, may the force be with you.
Matthew, thank you for having me on.
My pleasure.